about the Pentagon, but real quick, I do want to mention this story from Jason Leopold in BuzzFeed News. CIA files say staffers committed sex crimes involving children. They weren't prosecuted. He finds that over the past 14 years, the CIA has secretly amassed credible evidence that at least 10 of its employees committed sexual violence or sexual crimes against children. Though most of the cases were referred to U.S. attorneys for prosecution, only one individual was ever charged with the crime. And so that means, yes, there's 9 CIA pedophiles out there running around on the loose. It does seem that some of them were fired by the CIA for this, but these are serious crimes. One employee had sexual contact with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. We're not talking about like this guy happened to one time go on some website that he shouldn't have gone on. And, not that that's like an excusable thing. I'm not trying. These are sex crimes. These are people with legitimate, like, groping a 6-year-old is something that is going to potentially ruin that 6-year-old's life. Kids who are sexually abused have a higher risk of overdose, engaging in sexual abuse themselves, suicidal behavior, having serious mental illness, and they're doing nothing about this because the guy is in the CIA. They're worried about screwing up state secrets. Well, let me tell you something. If your state secrets are held by a pedophile, they're not state secrets. Okay. This is my major issue. You do, I guess, have to wonder what the issue is here. Like, do law enforcement agencies like the CIA and police departments draw in pedophiles because it puts them in positions of power where they can commit sexual crimes and legitimately get away with it? Like we're seeing here, like we've seen so many times with police officers. Is this a case where, you put these people, you cause them to do crazy things around the world, and, you justify it as the right thing to do, and that somehow breaks their brains, and then they do all kinds of sick shit like this? I'm really not sure exactly how it becomes the case, but the fact that nobody's being held accountable and that there's not protests out of the CIA office right now is unbelievable. Again, this is disgusting. And the thing that we should find most intolerable, crimes against children, is being covered up in the name of state secrets. There's really no state secret important enough that you would sacrifice the life of a child for it. All right, now on to the Pentagon. The Pentagon is calling for an end of anti-satellite weapons testing, and this was after a Russian test hit a satellite, and at least there's claims that it threatened the International Space Station. The U.S. has canceled a spacewalk, and I think said that the debris caused the space station to have to be maneuvered a couple of times. I'm not exactly sure if this is a situation where, like, out of an abundance of caution, it moved from like 5 miles away to 6 miles away, or if it really like had to take evasive action. My guess is that the Russians probably didn't directly threaten the International Space Station, although mistakes happen, right? Like, that they could have thought that the missile was going to hit the satellite, and it did, but it like pushed the debris field further than it thought it would. I don't know how they calculate these things. One really important part, though, is that the U.S. has carried out these tests in the past and has caused similar problems. And so, for all the condemnation of Russia here, there's really not a recognition that the U.S. has done this in the past. And now that the U.S. is pushing the anti-satellite missile testing ban, you have to wonder if, Russia maybe carried out this test hoping to provoke the U.S. to want to carry out some kind of international treaty on putting weapons in space. Now, I think the issue here is that Russia is going to say that, we're going to develop these anti-satellite missiles because you're talking about developing anti-missile systems and putting them in space. And if we could, develop anti-satellite missiles, then we could just take out those systems and not have to spend all the money on the anti-missile systems that you want to put in space. And so my guess is that Russia would look for a far more comprehensive space weapons test ban treaty thing, and not just anti-satellite missiles that the U.S. is asking for. But who knows, maybe the Russians will go for it and see, the potential problems here. This from Kelly Vallejos at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Poll: Americans' trust in military plummets to less than 50%. And she goes into and, talks about these numbers a little bit. Again, this is polling. Polling is off. But while, this is just one poll number, there are other numbers to, bat this up. First off, it's been going down for a while. 70% 2 years ago, 50% in March 8 months ago, now down to 50%. A Gallup poll found that 37% of Americans had a great deal of confidence in the military, 32% quite a lot. However, those numbers were the lowest number since 2001. And while that number is marginally higher than the Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute polling, it is still concerning. Or no, the Reagan Presidential Foundation found 45%. This was lower than the poll conducted by a leading conservative Republican organization, but at the same time, it is the lowest since 2001. And so even if the numbers don't, line up that only 50% of Americans trust the military or something like that, the Americans' trust in the military is going down, and this is shown through several different polling data sites. Now, the place people want to cover this up by saying that, it was because of Donald Trump and the way he used the National Guard in the military during the George Floyd protests. And there may be some truth to that. However, it wasn't like this wasn't something that was known before. In 2014, during the initial Black Lives Matter protests, after I think particularly the Michael Brown killing, they heavily used the National Guard there as well. And if you look at other things like the polling around the way Americans look at the post 9/11 wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, and how big of failures that they have been, I think that's far more likely the cause of the sharp decline in Americans' faith in military, and not just that the U.S. used the National Guard. And so, this is all really important. And the military is one of the institutions that the American people have the most faith in. Polls higher than president, Congress, Supreme Court, all of that. The military, and yet the military has been, at the direction and the other branches, of course, but the biggest failures over the past 20 years. And it seems maybe that the Americans are finally coming and realizing touch with that. It also could have something to do, of course, that Mark Milley right now is the head of the military, the commander of the Joint Chiefs, and he is not the brightest guy. All right, let's move on to some other stories about the military. This one could be another as to why Americans' faith in the military is plummeting. U.S. military explosives vanish, emerge in civilian world. This a joint investigation by the Associated Press and I believe the Military Times as well. And it's not, thousands or like tens of thousands of pounds or anything like that, but there are hundreds of pounds of plastic explosives, grenades, and all kinds of other landmines and rockets that get stolen from U.S. military forces, I think mostly in the United States. And it seems that these are mostly being stolen, by regular members of the military. Now, as far as any reporting is done, none of this has been used to carry out any at least serious crimes. Having it itself is a crime, but it's not like anybody has taken these and blown up their ex-wife's house or any of that. When I read this article, one of the interesting things is people who have either been caught or come forward after taking these kinds of explosives really kind of seem, I don't know, almost like a PTSD like reason for it, saying that there really wasn't a reason. They just felt safer having it around. And Again, this seems to me like something that could be a result of PTSD. So if you have people serving and using these explosives in a way that, you know, they saw as helpful to them or saving their life or something like that, then you bring them back to the United States and they no longer have the explosives. The way, you know, PTSD works for some people is that they like have a real compulsion to like have that kind of same thing. And so for some people it's, you know, just more standard arms and stuff like that. But for some people it could be these kind of explosives. And again, this wasn't like confirmed by the military. It's just my own suspicion. But I do have a history and like professionally, I worked with people who had PTSD. I'm fairly familiar with it. I've also read a lot about it in the military sense here as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if a big part of what's happening is that, you know, these guys feel for whatever reason that this makes them safer. And so they have it. You know, a lot of these people have like buried it in their yards and stuff like that. Now, there have been other things that could be more problematic. I think one person was either killed or injured when a shell exploded in a scrapyard. And so my guess is somebody stole some of these things, eventually got kind of antsy about having them, threw them like in a car, threw the car in a scrapyard. You know, that they blow up that car, and then somebody ends up getting hit from the shell that was in it. Very tragic. And, you know, obviously if you could find and hold somebody responsible for that, they should be, but that at this point seems to be the worst kind of issue here. Now, there's one more thing that's to point out, and that is that with explosives, there's some, I don't know, margins for error. Like a bullet, you have one, right? How many bullets did you shoot? 5. Okay, you shot 5 bullets, then you put the other 25 back in the box, and we know you don't have any extra, right? You could have evidence, boom, 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 boom. That was I hope 5. And you know that's 5. We know you shot 5 and everything like that. Now an explosive, especially C4, is like Play-Doh, and so you could pinch a little bit off, save it to the side, and nobody really knows because you do a big explosion. Also, they have a practice in the military where, let's say you're doing some explosive drills and everything like that. At the end, you have a couple pounds of explosives left over from various things. You could go fill out a whole lot of paperwork on returning it, or you could just like put it all in one big thing, hit a button, kaboomy. And so, you know, with all like the flexibility around that, it's pretty easy, I think, for people to marginally steal a little bit of explosive at a time. And again, so far this hasn't been used in any kind of crime or anything like that, but it is concerning that this is getting off of military bases and that it really doesn't seem to be heavily like punished, investigated, or well tracked. All right, now let's move on talking about former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who is suing the Pentagon for saying that they are unlawfully blocking parts of his forthcoming memoir, claiming it contains classified information. Esper says that it doesn't. I don't know. In a way, this is the only thing that would incentivize me to buy Esper's book is the fact that the Pentagon thinks there's things in it that shouldn't be said. I don't think that this is some kind of crazy marketing campaign from the Pentagon to increase the sales of Esper's book. This is something that happens a lot, but you know, unlike when it happens to somebody, I can't think of who actually. I'm pretty sure it happened to Peter Van Buren and John Kiriakou. But you know, there are people who have attempted to publish information like it's even redacted in the actual book, because if you work for like the Pentagon or something like that and then you try to write a memoir, you're supposed to submit it to them, they go over it, they get to decide what's in it or not, and they can pull out things that they claim are, you know, defending national security, which actually aren't, and just try to cover up crimes. Biden has appointed or nominated a new person to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisitions and Sustainment. Initially, Biden had appointed a man named Michael Brown to head that organ, or to head the post, but he was removed from consideration because he's under investigation from an inspector general for giving away jobs to his friends. This new guy Dr. William D. LaPlante, or Bill LaPlante, currently has a bunch of jobs. He works for, I don't know, a bunch of agencies that sound fairly suspicious, like the Aerospace Corporation and Draper Laboratories. There's also another one that's an acronym. All of these organizations that he seems to mostly work for are organizations that are funded by the government. Oh, the other one that's an acronym is MITRE, and he's in the national security sector there. So these organizations are funded, I think, by either the weapons makers, probably a minority, and then a majority by the government. And so, I mean, this guy is just a hybrid blob employee who takes money from several different organizations that, again, are funded by the Pentagon. And I can't figure out who else. Maybe the military industrial complex. I mean, you know, they say all these groups are non-for-profits, and yet they have revenues of hundreds of millions of dollars. And so it's really confusing to me exactly where all this money is coming from, except at least the MITRE funding, according to Whitney Webb, does come through the Pentagon and the national security state. LaPlante previously oversaw acquisitions as a part of the Air Force and worked on programs like the F-35, B-21, and KC-46 tanker. Of course, two of these, the KC-46 tanker actually being even a worse and bigger failure than the F-35, but the F-35 is a major failure itself. Very concerning that Biden is bringing this guy into this position. On the probably a week ago on the show, I had discussed fuel leaking from the Red Hills tank in Pearl Harbor. And, you know, this is Hawaii. There's a naval base, or I don't know what kind of base it is, actually. The base it is a U.S. Navy base in Pearl Harbor. And there's a massive, I think like 20,000 gallon tank or something that's filled with jet fuel that is now leaking into the groundwater. Initially, the Pentagon claimed that it hadn't contaminated anything, but now they are getting indications that it is in the drinking water and recommending that people test their water and stuff and be careful in households. Probably don't want to drink it if you live around Pearl Harbor. The U.S. is transferring armored vehicles to Greece. The first set, I believe it's 44, and they are coming from Germany. As Germany phased them out, they're just being donated by the U.S. And then the U.S. is going to bring over another package of these vehicles from the United States to Germany. I'm not sure how many vehicles Germany is going to get in total. These are armored vehicles, and they're going to have their communications equipment stripped out before they and weapons before they leave Germany, but they will have new communications equipment and machine guns installed once they get to Greece. Questionable what Greece is going to do with this. Maybe suppress domestic protests, or, you know, their biggest dispute really isn't like a concern with Russia. It's more a concern with another NATO ally, Turkey. The U.S. has also stepped up its training in Greece. We have Navy SEALs and Green Berets training with Greek Special Operations Forces on a couple of boats that the U.S. was also giving to Greece. All right, last story on the Pentagon real quick. We are deploying 1,000 National Guard unit members to East Africa. Not exactly sure what country they are going to. I believe it's 800 members of the Kentucky National Guard and 200 members of the Virginia National Guard are transferring out. Of course, this is at a time. Oh, I'm sorry, that's reverse actually. 800 from Virginia, 200 from Kentucky. And they're going to go to Fort Bliss for a month of training first before they end up there. Again, you know, the Guard has been used pretty heavily in the past couple of years in the United States to fill staffing shortages, on supply chain issues, medical issues, provide other things, firefighting services, and everything like that. So, kind of concerning that they're taking them out and sending them to Africa, where the U.S. really doesn't need to be involved.